right, let's break all this down.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
And you know, it's interesting to suggest that we can break all this down is, well, it's ridiculous, as a matter of fact. And, you know, we have a unique situation here on this program, and even on the radio on WPRO weekdays 3 till 6, in that I don't have 12 people in a semicircle all discussing this from their own expertise, inside knowledge, hypotheticals, token Republicans, and I say token Republicans because at least CNN and MSNBC always make sure they have one or two. On the Fox side, it's the inverse. You have a couple of voices that maybe see the Democratic perspective on this whole thing. Although I will tell you, one of the toughest guys I've seen on television is Judge Napolitano on Fox News, who has continued to see this thing, I think, objectively. Chris Wallace on Fox Television Network has seen this thing objectively. Brett Baier, I think, on Fox News has done what he can to see this thing objectively. Get into the prime time, and it is like Janet from another planet. It is just unbelievable. But my point is there's so much that I can do here from our little world in southern New England with this television show, especially since we tape daily, Monday through Thursday, and that's usually, it's in the afternoon. And then we tape our Friday show on Thursday too, and those of you who are regular viewers, you know that. I'm not de-emphasizing our conversation here. I'm just expressing, you know, somewhat of a self-acknowledgement that there's a limitation. However, what I do enjoy is having bright minds on this, and we have a circle of expertise that we've been able to connect with from Brown University. You conservatives, stop rolling your eyes as soon as I say Brown University, because we've gotten different points of view, diversity of political insight, and I think a pretty well-rounded approach to all of this. If you feel like this show becomes imbalanced at any time, you're welcome to contact us here at WPRI and/or through Facebook, and/or through Twitter, and/or through whatever you need to do. And tell us that you want a piece of the action. We do have two key Republicans in Rhode Island coming on Monday, and they are the two co-chairs of the Trump re-election campaign. I had Sue Cienki here, the chairman of the Republican Party, earlier this week, chastise her for a solicitation that I thought was bait and switch and almost fraudulent, where they were asking for your support for Donald Trump. Kind of, you would have gotten the impression that it was for his defense fund, which there is none. It's pretty disingenuous activity, but we had a little skirmish on the issues of the impeachment itself. She refused, by the way, to say in person what she committed to in an email solicitation, and that is a reference to the intel world and the State Department as the deep state. Easy to put in writing when you're looking for money, not so easy to say it on television now, is it? My point is that we're doing the best we can to get perspective here. It has been an interesting time, and the impeachment thing will slow down over the Thanksgiving week next week, as we will too. All right, kind of long-winded, I know, but I just wanted to get some things off my chest in terms of what I perceive might be some of the viewer qualms over the program. In the meantime, because A, we tape two shows on Thursday, for Thursday and Friday, and because he's brilliant and I love his theories, not just his analysis of the current news events. Michael Kennedy, who is a sociologist and, by the way, has incredible expertise in Eastern European and in Russian issues, is here for both programs, which is good for Mike because I don't have to slow him down, because when he gets going, I kind of take a break. In the meantime, here's the headline from Thursday. All right, so we are going to, well, this is Thursday's show as you're watching it, but here's we're going to kind of do the Wednesday, Thursday cycle, and on tomorrow night's show, we'll do the Fiona Hill and et al. Conversation, and Mr. Holmes, who are, as we tape the show, fascinating on Thursday morning. We'll talk about that on the Friday show. Here was what we had last night.
President Trump's hand-picked ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, says he was following the president's orders when he worked with Rudy Giuliani on Ukraine matters.
Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, With regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes.
Sondland testified Giuliani, the president's personal attorney, was demanding Ukraine make a public statement announcing political investigations. Sondland said top officials, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, were in the loop.
Even as late as September 24th of this year, Secretary Pompeo was directing Kurt Volker to speak with Mr. Giuliani.
Sondland has already had to go back and change his closed-door testimony after his original reports were disputed by so many witnesses. He blames the inconsistencies on the State Department and White House not giving him access to phone records and other documents.
In the absence of these materials, my memory, admittedly, has not been perfect.
Democrats had a warning for President Trump and Pompeo for withholding the documents.
They do so at their own peril.
Republicans say this is the latest in a long line of false charges.
The Democrats have exploited the Intelligence Committee for political purposes for 3 years, culminating in these impeachment hearings and their mania to attack the president.
In a statement Thursday, the White House said the entire premise of Democrats' quid pro quo has been debunked. Aid was released and Ukraine never took any action. 2 more witnesses testify later today.
All right, welcome in. Professor Kennedy, thanks for joining me. Both of us have our phones out during breaks to listen to what's going on in our real time, which is Thursday at 1:30, where Fiona Hill is testifying, and Mr. Holmes was testifying earlier this morning as well. We'll cover that in our next session, which will be the Friday program. Let's reverse our mindset now to yesterday, and/or I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this entire process. So why don't I ask you for your executive summary on what you've seen so far over this week of impeachment inquiry?
So, 2.5 years ago on this show, and I think I retweeted it recently, you and I were anticipating that impeachment would happen. When I was on the show maybe 5 weeks ago, last month sometime.
By the way, that feeds the narrative of people who continue to defend this president. That said, you guys, what are you guys and talking about
and
impeachment?
I think that's an important point.
Yeah. Not to interrupt your train of thought, but I figure I'd catch that right away.
But I want to come back to that because that's a legitimate point that I want to address. But 5 weeks ago, the only difference between now and 5 weeks ago is that we've had this series of testimony from all of these professionals in the security and State Department worlds who have been challenging the narrative that President Trump and Rudy Giuliani and others have been putting out there. That's a huge shift that we need to take account of. And it's not, and the big shift though is what happened yesterday.
Wednesday,
when our ambassador to the European Union stood up, and he's not a professional in the State Department. He's a politically appointed figure. So this is the stuff that we need to talk about because this is the game changer between last month and today.
Game changing meaning what?
I don't know if you have seen Michael Steele's tweet from yesterday.
Former Republican chair?
Former RNC chair, whom I've gotten to know a little bit because he's at the Watson Institute at Brown. And one of the things that one of the things that I'm struck by.
Prominent guy on network television, primarily MSNBC.
Yeah, and he is one of those token Republicans, I think you could say. But he's not a token conservative. One of the things when I got to know him is that this is a guy who has deep conservative principles. And I was shocked because he was always on MSNBC. But he is a conservative Republican. So that's one thing. We should probably disentangle conservatives and Republicans.
Well,
right now.
well, it might be interesting to talk about old-fashioned conservative Republicans because Donald Trump has stolen the mantra of conservative hardly with conservative principles en route to it, right? So, I mean, the political science of this is fascinating. But you were saying,
okay, so this is the big game changer. You know that we now have testimony from such strong figures as right now Fiona Hill and the other figures in the State Department and in the security establishment. I don't know that's going to change anything right now because what we need to talk about is not only what is being said about Ukraine, but how there are 2 impeachment processes going on. On the one hand, we have the Democrats, on the other hand, we have the Republicans, and they're living in different worlds. So we need to be able to understand sociologically why these two worlds are so far apart, and if there's anything that might bring them together. And this is why I mentioned Michael Steele. This is why I appreciated your remarks at the beginning of the program. Because one of the things we absolutely need is to end this, sort of bifurcated world of news and information. We need to bring together conservatives, liberals. We need to bring together Democrats and Republicans, because the only way we're going to avoid not just this kind of polarization, but a violent polarization that I do fear, is if we can actually have some common ground.
Well, one of the things I think that may create some of that, at least on the screens, is, to the Democrats' credit, the live testimony. Because it's one thing to be able to refute that which is bubbling on the social media surface, or even, all due respect to the print media, written. But when Americans see, hear real people, real live people discussing things, even anchors. I've been spending more time watching Fox News than CNN and MSNBC, because I feel a predictability about how they'll respond to obvious testimony. But I wonder whether obvious testimony on Fox will be received as such, and I think begrudgingly it has. I'm talking about daytime, not nighttime.
Right.
But daytime, begrudgingly, they've said, new information. Something we didn't know. The president's on his heels. Republicans are going to have a hard time responding to that. Or, and even on the other side of MSNBC, CNN, those kind of folks, there have been moments when they've talked about the Democrats overplaying their hand or missing the point. Whether we get to that bridge or bridge that gap is anybody's guess over the course of time. But when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the psychology of this thing versus getting into the minutes of it yet. Stay with us. Not exactly sure what that is. Was that that was a graphic that went sideways, but it actually was. Some days the headline really was about is a I'm having one of those days, Mike. A BuzzFeed News headline that you in fact thought was an interesting thing to talk about, and that is that there are two separate impeachment hearings happening right now, and Republicans are winning theirs. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. The layers of perspective, especially when it comes to media analyzing media, are fascinating. Two impeachment hearings, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. In fact, you literally are waiting for volleys back and forth. There's hardly any expectation, I think, that any viewer, voter, constituent, citizen has that there will be consensus on any point, at least when it comes to the interrogation. And I've been waiting for that. But talk to me about the psychology of the two impeachments.
So, but let me begin with the consensus. We can't expect consensus, but we might see movement toward a kind of mutual understanding about how to deal with this. Because right now, we are having two stories being told. One is the story, the Republican story, that Democrats have been out to get Trump from the very start, that they couldn't beat him in a fair election, and so therefore they're going to impeach him, and there have been Democrats who wanted to impeach him right from the start. I'd like to talk about that for a little bit. That's whenever you wish.
Right now. I think it's true.
It is true. But here's the thing that I think makes this very interesting. Why were Democrats out to get him from the start? Was it because he just beat Hillary Rodham Clinton? Or was it because he has been doing things that other people would have been impeached for? And I think about this at the start. Why did the Women's March take place? The Women's March took place because Trump was worse than Bill Clinton, if you can imagine that, right? He may not have been having all of these dalliances while he was president, but he was lying while he was president. That was an impeachable offense
Lying about what?
about sexual relationships with that woman, that woman, that woman, and that woman.
Why is that an impeachable? Are you talking about that's
To lie about that.
Clinton?
Clinton was impeached for that. Trump, some people wanted to impeach Trump right from the start.
Yeah,
Why?
But that was pre-election, and the election
was
refuted
his-
that.
The election didn't refute
Well,
his
the
lies.
bus commentary. What's it called? What's the bus called? I mean, what's the show?
Oh yeah.
I grab women by the.
That's right.
That was all.
That was all right. So
Okay,
he
and
was
you're
so my
talking about
point
Stormy.
is-
You're talking about
Stormy
Stormy. You're talking about
Daniels and
well,
the-
again, that was behavior to get elected, not behavior after elected.
So my point here, however, is that the Republican Party that was eager to impeach Clinton for analogous behavior, even if not at the same time in their presidency, would never happen today. Democrats were ready to play the Republican role in wanting to impeach him. So my point here is to say that what we need to do is to not just say Democrats have been out to impeach him. We need to talk about the salience, as you're doing, the importance of the things that those who are critical of Trump identify as impeachable. Here's a list. Ready? I went to something called needtoimpeach.com just to see what the opponents to Trump would say. He has been obstructing justice, profiting from the presidency, collusion, advocating political violence, abuse of power. No collusion. Engaging in reckless foreign policy, persecuting political enemies, attacking the free press, violating immigrants' due process, violating campaign finance law. Almost every week there's something that he could be impeached for. Now, the reason why I see there's a difference between...
Yeah, I think 3 of those are at least just policy disagreements as opposed to impeachable offenses, all due respect to them.
Yeah, I'm not going to debate...
That's the phlegm they're coughing up.
So this is a full list. And in fact, we could even say, remember when he was wanting to have that G7 meeting at Doral? That's impeachable too.
Well, he had to pull it back. I mean, it was so egregious, so outrageous that the Monument Clause was so clearly being violated by his intent that he had to yank that one back.
Right. So it's only when you actually commit the crime, not when you intend to commit the crime, that you can be impeached. Is that right?
Well, it's very much, I think there is very much some common ground between the Doral attempt and what happened here with this entire Ukrainian saga.
Absolutely.
Because he was caught in the middle of the process.
So here is where the really meaningful common ground can be found. I think this is really important. Because what we are differing in is the relative significance of all of these acts. One of the things we should be talking about is whether the intent to commit a crime is impeachable. Legally, anything is, you can impeach somebody just for political purpose because it's not, you don't have to have committed a crime to be impeached.
Right.
Right?
Abuse of power is not a crime.
Absolutely. But abuse of power is the principal theme right now. So.
I get where you're going.
Right.
We have to pause. We'll come back and we'll hone this thing down. Because it's really, Mike's saying exactly what I've been saying the entire time, which is, can we just stipulate to the story and argue whether it's impeachable? We'll be right back.
Now, if you weren't fake news, you'd cover it properly. I say to the ambassador in response, I want nothing, I want nothing, I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky, President Zelensky, to do the right thing. So here's my answer. I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky to do the right thing. Then he says, this is the final word from the President of the United States. I want nothing. Thank you, folks. Have a good time. I'm going to bed.
So, he won't let Republicans stipulate. He won't let the Republicans, and by the way, I think there are very big differences between House Republicans and Senate Republicans. So this notion that Senate Republicans are just going to dispose of this thing readily, I don't buy that yet. I think that's why, you know how the old sports phrase, that's why they play the game? That's why they'll have the court process. Anyway. But because he won't stipulate to anything here being wrong, working off the repetition of the reference to the perfect phone call, he's not giving the room that you're looking for a healthy debate. And the healthy debate is, all right, here's what happened. Can we all agree? Here's what happened. Let's talk about whether it's impeachable. It's kind of like a couple of parents, you know, their kid comes home at 2 o'clock in the morning, all jammed up. You know, mom and dad have a little bit, you know, one's protective of the other, blah, blah, blah. And then finally they have to talk it over and say, you know what, all right, listen, can we stipulate that A, he's supposed to be home by midnight, B, that he was drunk, C, that he shouldn't be out with that girl, D, that we have to talk to her, right, that kind, you know, and he shouldn't have been drunk, right? Before we decide what to do with him. I mean, really, isn't that kind of where we need to be to get healthy again? I don't know if we're going to get there.
I don't know if we're going to get there either.
But isn't that what you were talking about?
We have to try. And this is why I appreciate your points earlier. That is, this live testimony by living, breathing people who are discussing the challenges of their life, where you can see, I mean, Fiona Hill is, you know, ice tough. Masha Jovanovic was also tough, but you could feel the ways in which she was struggling through her own dismissal as Ukrainian ambassador. So that's significant. But what I think these testimonies are enabling this country to do is to try to establish a common factual ground. Not necessarily the meaning of whether something is impeachable, that has to be debated. But they're now clearly establishing that there was a quid pro quo.
Yeah, but the Republicans won't give on it.
They're gonna have to figure out a way to give on it.
I think you're going to find the Senate, when they receive articles of impeachment, depending on how they're constructed, are going to give on it.
Yeah, I agree.
And then they're going to decide. Then the jury is going to go in and decide, because unlike a criminal trial, the jury also decides the sentence. So a jury can go back and say, you know what, guilty. A judge decides a sentence. The Senate's a judge and jury. Mm-hmm. But that stipulation is the way to get healed here, and because he won't do the mea culpa, and never will, he's not giving any of this room to breathe. Last thought before we wrap up. And we'll continue tomorrow night, by the way.
This is how I concluded last time I was on the show, and that is, he is hanging the Republican Party because he's not allowing them to act intelligently. He's forcing them to act like idiots. And that's shameful. I may be a Democrat, but the only way we can have a democracy is if we have a multi-party, decent contest, and he's preventing it.
Right, we'll tell you what we'll talk about tomorrow night next. Stay with us. And so tomorrow night, we'll take a look at some of the expertise that's been offered here on Russian and Ukrainian issues, which seem to get lost in the important sauce. You have a great night. See you on the radio at 3 on WPRO tomorrow as well. Bye.